Okay, folks, we're ready to go one last time. If we could have you take your seats, we'll get started with our last panel. While we're doing that, if you could just join me in thanking the staff at the Sheraton who's been so kind to deliver lunch and all of the things they've done. Thank you so much. Really helpful. I just want to say a couple things about the last panel. Two things. When I was first in Sarah's job, now I refer to it as Sarah's job, as the director of, at that time, Child Development Division, probably the first week on the job, Shelley Spiegel-Coleman and others called me down for a little meeting in LA to talk about two things: dual language learners and play. And I just want to congratulate them because they've never given up. You know, we've come a long way from our first conversation way back then, and that was amazing. So I just appreciate them so much. I don't even think they're in the room, but just want them to know that. And the other is being the mother of two adopted girls from a different country. You know, before they came, now I have to say, I was really a lot younger when they came. It was over 30 years ago. And the social worker we were working with told us all about cultural differences. We were very naive then. And we said, yeah, right. And then our girls got here. And they were 3 and 1. And all of a sudden, somebody wouldn't look me in the eye because it was culturally disrespectful. And we, in our, I'm going to say, being as naive as we were, took a long time to really understand what that meant. So my appreciation for families is not only one that is learned, but one that I have lived. So we have lots of work to do, but oh my goodness, it's so worth it, and we will do it. So with that, we are now moving on to building the foundation of a birth to 12th grade system. We're so excited. It's my pleasure to introduce Deepa Fernandez, who will be facilitating our last panel on building the foundation for a birth to 12th grade system. She is a reporter for KCET SoCal Connected and PRI's The World. She is an award-winning journalist who covers global stories of children and women, immigrants, and the environment. Prior to Southern California Public Radio, Deepa founded and ran a national nonprofit that aimed to diversify the ranks of journalism by training new reporters in communities of color. We want to acknowledge that Deepa has been incredibly and supportive voice for us to uplift key early learning and education issues, and we are so delighted to have her serve as the facilitator of this last and final panel. Please welcome Deepa Fernandez.
Hello, everybody out there. Did you all get some coffee so you can wake up a bit for this last panel? It's been a great day, but it's been a long day, and we want to make sure that everybody has full attention, because this panel is really bringing some new ideas, and I think for many of you out there, this is going to be a really interesting way in which you can begin to bring together the work of early childhood with the K-12 system. So it's an honor to be here, and I have to say that when they told me about this panel, it was called Systems Alignment Between ECE and K-12 is Good for Children and Family, and the journalist in me said, what is systems alignment? That sounds like something we need to do on a spreadsheet. And so I think for me, and I heard it said earlier today that asking silly questions is good. That's the basis that I do all my work from. And it's all of you in this room, some have had the chance to say hello to again, who've educated me on early childhood. And I think that's really what we want to be able to do today, is learn about what this new push is of systems alignment. So without any further ado, you should have some cards on your tables. We would love to take questions from you. It's like the previous panels, it's not going to be a wait till the end and ask your questions, so scribble them down as they come to your mind, and there'll be some staff people roaming around. Just pass them the card and they'll get them up here. We have with us a very esteemed panel, and it's a good chance to be able to ask your questions. These are rare opportunities that we get to ask the people who are on the front lines of doing the work. So I want to thank our panelists. Their full bios are in your programs, so please, you can look at those. But furthest over there to my left is Assemblymember Kevin McCarty, and we're very honored that he could join us today. He was elected to the California State Assembly in 2014. And he represents the 7th Assembly District. And we also have with us Edgar Zazueta, who is a Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations for the Association of California School Administrators, and he oversees advocacy efforts here in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., and that's one of the largest umbrella administrator organizations in the United States. Scott Moore is the Executive Director at Kidango, which is one of the largest preschool providers in the Bay Area. Doesn't that just sound like fun? Don't you want to go to a place called Kidango? Scott was also the guy who I used to call all the time to get the policy explained to me when he was a policy wonk at Early Edge, California. So there is hope for policy wonks. They can become Maria. And right here we have Yvonne Molles, who's the Vice Chair of the California Teachers Association, and she's on the Early Childhood Education Committee, and she's a special education teacher. So, welcome to all of you. We're going to open up, and each one of the panelists is just going to speak for a few minutes and tell us where they come to this idea of what's being called the B12 system, the birth to 12 system. So, Senator McCarthy, we'll start with you.
Okay. Assemblymember. Thank you.
Sorry.
And not McCarthy, because he wants.
That's too close.
Yeah, he wants to get rid of Head Start. McCarty wants to keep pre-K for all.
There you go.
I'm sorry, Kevin McCarthy, but that's the truth. Anyway, first of all, I want to thank the Advancement Project for putting together this gathering for 10 years now. And so just for you know, I'm a lawmaker now, an assembly member, but I used to be an advocate with Preschool California, Early Edge California, so I sat out there in the table a few times. And knowing now what I know sitting in the desk writing laws, it really makes a big, big difference to have people in the front lines pushing this issue, whether you're an advocacy group, a practitioner, a preschool teacher, a provider, an entity, a community group that just cares about early education. We need everybody pushing it because there are a lot of people knocking on those doors. And if you're not knocking, you're not going to get heard, and you'll get kind of put at the back of the list. So to the bigger question of B through 12, yeah, I think it's systems alignment, but maybe to more plain English terminology is coordination, because I think that's the important thing, that we focus on education, and certainly it's about kids, but too often it's child care, there's preschool, there's K-12, there's college, but it's all about education and having a youngster learn from birth all the way through 12, and I would actually say 16, because that really is the future. If you want a good job and successful life in the 21st century economy, you need more education beyond that. So I think it is critically important, but I just want to note that I know this is talk about systems alignment and B12, but somebody, and we'll get to these panel discussions a little bit, as somebody who's in the trenches there, I think it's critically important to don't forget the P or the E, the early education. or the pre-kindergarten, because that doesn't always have the high-powered advocates at the state capitol lobbying for these issues. And so at the end of the day, when we balance those budgets and put together our priority list, there are spreadsheets we have to pick and choose, and many times it's the last person, banging at the door. And so we need to make sure we stay vigilant on this issue. And there are a lot of opportunities coming up with the legislative leadership, very supportive, and a governor's race the next couple of years to really shape the debate for the next 8 years. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I love how you framed it in terms of systems alignment. And one thing that resonated with me yesterday, and it was at a pre-conference that Advancement Project had, and we were talking about research and the local control funding formula, which you've heard referenced a number of times today. And it stuck with me that as much as we talk about systems and alignment, that really what at the end of the day is most important is teaching and learning, right? That's ultimately what we're trying to get at. And I think, like the Assembly member said, that's ultimately the main goal here. Being a policy wonk sometimes, or being on the advocacy side, you can get into some meetings here in Sacramento where we talk a lot about a lot of things. You could literally be in an hour-long meeting, and this is all education, folks. And if you just sit back and listen, there's times where we may not actually say the word students or kids. And I think that, just to kind of take a step back and really think about that, that's kind of scary. So one thing I really appreciate with the focus, and sometimes, and I love what the Advancement Project is trying to do on bringing us together, that it is a continuum, that it's birth to 12. Because the one thing I do appreciate about the quote unquote early ed folks, like the last panel, how we're talking about play, we're talking about very specifics, that's sometimes things that are lost in the bigger policy conversation. So for us, I think it makes sense, representing now the school administrators from around the state, superintendents, school principals, and having to represent them here in this policy forum. Everybody knows the value of early ed and why it's so important for us to focus on that. Where it gets difficult is when we have those conversations about priorities, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more when we have to go to Assemblymember McCarty here and know that as much as we want everything, that it is zero sum so often when it comes to the decisions that they have to make and that we have to advocate for. So I think trying to look at it as a whole continuum and what is most important for that kid, regardless of which system you're in, I think is a worthy endeavor, and I'm glad that the Advancement Project has continued to kind of bring us together with that aim.
Cool. Well, good afternoon. We're going to try and keep you awake for the last remainder of this great conference. I do want to say it is kind of remarkable that it's been 10 years of water cooler conferences. I'm sure I was there at the first one. In terms of how things have changed, if you had said back then that the guy that you walk the Capitol hallways every day is going to be one of the key leaders and champions for early childhood in the legislature, Kevin McCarty, I would have said, that's a great dream, but I don't believe it'll happen. And I think that we all owe him and the legislature so much gratitude for the funding increases we've gotten. We've been able to pay our teachers a lot more, and I've said that to you personally, but I want to say that in front of the whole group here. And then, hey, we had a few gubernatorial candidates, right? Like, wow. I don't think, even just in the last gubernatorial election, I don't know if either candidate knew how to spell early childhood or early education, or early learning or preschool, or any of the words that we use to call ourselves. And now you have 4 candidates, and certainly some of them who are real experts and real champions and who are not new, but have been with us for a long time. And this is different. This is, I think, we're seeing a new window of opportunity begin to open, and one that we should be, dreaming bigger, because there's potentially going to be a wonderful opportunity for us, hopefully in the next couple of years. And so if we're going to dream big, let's dream, you know, broadly and comprehensively, and that's what this panel is about. But let's do it together, and I think that's what the water cooler is always, you know, and a lot of conferences that try and bring the early childhood community together. We have so many different, you know, funding streams and silos and programs, and it does not help us in our efforts to be a unified field. And I think in the last couple of years, we've gotten some momentum around having a unified voice, and I'm, you know, just incredibly impressed with the leadership that's helping make that happen. And we got to continue it. We got to build on that. That's going to be the key. If we start to splinter as the opportunity gets bigger, we're going to lose it. And so it's incumbent on us to continue to join hands and walk down this path together. I was asked to talk a little bit about some work we're doing in the East San Jose community of Alum Rock. I have 1 minute. Well, I'll talk more about it with questions. I'll like flip your questions around or
No
spin.
worries.
I'll do
You can-
spin.
I'm just going.
I haven't had to do spin for so long. But essentially what we've been able to do in Alum Rock, and this is really under the leadership of First Five Santa Clara, it started out as just how do we get all kids into a pre-K or a TK program. Kidango provides all or almost all of the preschool and Head Start in the Alum Rock School District. And then the school district obviously does all of the transitional kindergarten. We got together and said, how do we expand both these programs so that every child has at least 1 year? And we've now, just in the last couple of years, expanded it to several hundred additional children. We feel that we're very close to being able to say that Alum Rock is the first community in San Jose to have preschool for all. And I know that traditionally we think of state preschool and transitional kindergarten is competing, but we're working together so that we can expand it to all kids, and we're all full. So it's working well there. But as soon as we started talking about preschool and TK, of course, and if any of you know the head of First Five Santa Clara, Jolene Smith, she will not let you talk in a silo for more than 30 seconds. So now we're doing everything. You know, we just opened Early Head Start with an early intervention integrated model classroom. We have developmental screenings, healthcare. We opened a family resource center. It's actually amazing what is coming into that community from all the different partners, from the County Office of Ed on down. So I'm happy to talk more about it, but that's some exciting things we're up to.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you to the Advancement Project and CTA for allowing me to be here. I am the voice of labor. I am the teacher in the classroom every day with the kiddos birth to 5. I represent, at negotiations table, I represent birth to 22. So I love this panel because I'm not just early childhood. I represent everybody, and we are a team. I was telling this morning one of my colleagues, it's not an us versus them. So it's not early childhood versus K-12. It shouldn't be that way. When I go to policy committees, I'm not negotiating or I'm not talking about just my group. I'm talking about what the big picture looks like. And I love foundation. I love that that's in this panel because I believe as a teacher in early childhood, I'm building a house. Each student is a house, and when they come in birth to 3, we're building that essential foundation. And then 3 to 5, we're adding it, so we're scaffolding on top of it. And then when they go on to my K through 12 partners, they're gonna build the rest of that house. And hopefully by the time, like the Assemblyman said, by the time that they're 16, they're gonna go out into that higher ed community. So I just am very passionate about putting our money where it should be, and it should be not only just birth to 5, but birth through 12, and really having it aligned so that my kindergarten teachers, when they get my kiddos who feed into those districts, I'm giving them the best of the best, and they have the skills they need to be successful. And it breaks my heart when I have my state preschool teachers tell me, well, we couldn't qualify a student because they didn't fit the income requirements. So then my head goes, well, where does that student go? Either a licensed daycare facility. What if the parents can't afford that? Then they're just at home with family. And I want each and every child in California to be competitive. I want them to have the best foundation, and I want them to go into kindergarten with the best set of tools possible. So,
You know, it's really interesting listening to all of you. And I would want to say maybe just even 5 years ago, early childhood as a policy issue, early childhood as an issue that even gained national attention, let alone came up in budget policy discussions, was not part of a wide mainstream discussion. That's not to say it wasn't happening, but it wasn't so mainstream. And I think it's credit to this field that a lot of hard work has been done to put it up there. And I just want to pose the question that do any of you, is there any fear perhaps, or maybe this is the glass half empty version, that after all this hard work to align 0 to 5 with the K through 12 system, that these little people down this end might just get lost in this bigger system? Is that a valid fear, and or whether you see it is do you feel like the case you've been making to your fellow lawmakers now is a different case that you have to make, and that like hard pushing for under 5 somehow gets subsumed into the big K through 12 machine?
You're looking at me, I see. Yeah. Sure. Well, first, your first thing is I thought it was incredibly exciting. I think in the 2008 presidential campaign, when it was at the end, the final candidates in the Democrat side, of course, but President Obama and Hillary Clinton, they were talking about early child education and pre-K, and you didn't see that before, and ever since then, it's been in the policy debate, the political debate. You saw 4 gubernatorial candidates, and I guarantee all 4 of them will have this as an issue because it's the right thing to do. All the research talks about it, and also politics talk about it. You saw that there was a poll that came out this week that said that voters want this to be a top issue for Californians. So it's both politically smart and, of course, the right thing to do. But I did say earlier in my intro, I think it is critically important that when you go through the B through 12th grade, and like I said, 16th grade, you can't forget the E. Not just because it's the littlest kids, but I think the efforts to make sure we're properly funded in that aren't there. We've taken great strides, for example, the last 3 years in the budget, and frankly, it's been lucky since I've been chairing the budget. The economy's been doing better. No correlation there, of course. but we've spent $1 billion more in the last 3 years, and we had huge cuts during the recession, but we still have like 25 to 40,000 kids who start kindergarten without any preschool, Head Start, transitional kindergarten, no infant and toddler program. So way too many kids are still left behind. And so if we just focus on that and not remember that so many kids are starting at the starting point without having a fair chance to succeed, then I think that would be a mistake.
I have a thought. I mean, I do, you ask, is there any worry? And anytime, so a couple of times, especially at the early ed conferences when, get asked to speak or be on a panel, when I'm going to be the K-12 voice, which I think in this case I was supposed to be, I get worried because then I ask myself, so it's my job to be the naysayer then. That's what's going to happen. But no, I mean, to that point, I think the only concern I have, and this is something that Kevin has been one of our biggest champions in education for the whole system. It's this whole issue, and the people here across the street, not Assemblymember McCarty, but maybe some of his colleagues, may see that we're always whining about the funding, right? The funding, that it always comes down that there's never enough. But the problem is that when we're having this conversation, and as much as we come together here in these settings, when we're across the street and we're having these conversations, it does end up having to be sometimes zero sum. And the problem is that it's underfunded across the spectrum. So then you get into the conversation, and this is essentially the policy consideration that the legislators have to make, or when the money comes down to the school administrators, especially in this era of local control, the choice is, okay, who are you going to underfund? Are you going to underfund them at the beginning? Are you going to underfund them in the middle or at the end? But essentially, we know right off the bat that somebody's not going to get enough. And then we have to make that choice about where do we pick. So that's the only caution that I think I see as we move to make it a continuum. Because yeah, it is local control, and for all the aspects of LCFF and giving more authority to the folks closest to the students, with that comes a huge responsibility about where is it that you're going to invest those dollars that are limited for all of the augmentations. And here's the thing, that every year that under the leadership of Assemblymember McCarty and his colleagues, that there has been more infusion into the system, but the pot hasn't grown. It's prioritizing where are you going to put it in. It's out of the existing pot. And I think that I see that as the biggest challenge moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, there's no question it's a concern. We're minuscule in the terms of the total state budget and in terms of K-12. If you look at any city or state in the country that's done something of significance, like a significant amount of new money or universal preschool or whatever have you, it's always been a governor or a mayor who has made it a top priority. And to me, that should be our #1 goal, is how do we have a governor who makes this one of their top 3 priorities, something that they insist on doing in the first 100 days. That opportunity is with us. We have one major city in California that has preschool for all, that's San Francisco. The mayor of that city is now running for governor, but he's not the only champion, even as a gubernatorial candidate, for early learning. That, to me, is going to be the difference.
So I have to apologize. Oftentimes when these questions come up, I always say I'm a bulldog with a smile, and I've been told that many times because I do kind of fight back against we only have so much money, so I apologize for the bulldog to come out. But, I look at early childhood almost like preventative care. We have to address the needs of our kiddos now. We got to put the money there, because otherwise, as taxpayers, as educators, as lawmakers, we're going to end up paying for it somewhere. Because if these kiddos don't get the right start that they need, then we have that prison pipeline, right? And either we're paying for it in prisons, rehabilitation centers, or kiddos who maybe need more. So somewhere we're going to pay for it. And that's always my fear when it comes to budgets, is that the little ones are always the first to be slashed. And I hate that, because we are the front line. We are the first responders. So that's where our money should go, is in the first responders. But I understand the other side of the house, that it needs to be equitable so that we put the investment in and we continue to grow that investment.
Who do you need to convince? Like, who are the people who may be the ones to skew that money, that the pie of money more towards K through 12 and away from 0 to 5?
For me, I think it's everybody. It's really engaging all stakeholders, the lawmakers, the policymakers, the parents, the early advocacy groups. Is really engaging everybody and letting them know, educating them that this is what the bigger picture looks like. This is what birth through 12 looks like.
It's interesting, some of the questions coming from you all out there are around some of the process, which, I think you will all have a very interesting take on, given where you come from it. There's early childhood in some ways has some different needs to, well, maybe not K and maybe not 1 and 2 and 3, but on up through the system. There seems to be more time in early childhood for social emotional learning. There seems to be more of a focus on play-based learning, on, just on the nuts and bolts of it versus, is there things that the K through 12 system can learn from early childhood, and is that part of a B12 system that it gets pushed up?
I'll go. I think, yes, absolutely. Right now, we're doing a lot of social emotional learning. And I try to encourage and engage my kindergarten teachers. So we have a thing called job sharing. So they come and we swap, and I spend a day in their kindergarten program. They spend a day in my preschool autism program. And they get to see what that social emotional learning looks like and how those skills can carry over into their kindergarten program.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering, should it go beyond kindergarten? You know,
Oh,
maybe it's an
absolutely.
easier case to make that kindergarten should do it, but what about a 6th grader or a 10th grader?
It should carry on all the way through 12th grade.
And how do you make that case? How would you convince your principal?
Well, again, that bulldog with a smile. So I go not only to my principal, but I go to, in my case, I have an area director and assistant superintendent of student services. And I tell them, you know, you start the social emotional program with us at, you know, preschool level. We continue to grow it through K through 5th, and then we reshape it so it looks different for 5th. In junior high, we all know junior high is very different beast than early childhood. So, but they address their needs differently and then scaffold onto that into high school.
Yeah.
Did you want to add?
I think, you know, K-12 is actually really starting to focus a lot more on social emotional learning, and, you know, as the research shows that it's not just something that happens in the early years, but obviously throughout education. And we begin to learn more and more about what it is that, you know, K-12 colleagues can do to support social emotional development. That is an exciting part of what's happening in K-12 right now, and I think we understand that, you know, those quote-unquote soft skills are oftentimes as important as the academic ones. And so we see, you know, our school district partners really do embrace now the social emotional aspect of what we do, and do look to partner, and we have you know, opportunities to do shared professional development and those kinds of things, where oftentimes the content might come from early learning.
So we're getting lots of questions. I'm going to maybe rapid fire go through a few of them. So this one is for Scott and Yvonne. Any advice that you might have? Because sometimes doors are not open to partner with the K through 12 system, and early childhood is seen as early childhood over there. Do you have advice for providers who may want to partner?
For me, it's having the discussion. So I'm a county office, but it's engaging your district leaders. It's engaging those teachers in those districts. And again, the stakeholders, so bringing the parents in and having conversations with them. And I think that's how everything starts, is you have to have a conversation. You have to kind of leave titles at the door and figure out what's the best way to collaborate. And again, I go back to, it's not us versus them. So it's really engaging those district stakeholders and parents and figuring out a way to merge across.
Is it making a case? Is it?
Sometimes it is making a case. And like I said, sometimes it's having to leave those titles at the door and just figure out putting students first. And often we forget that. We don't put students first. We put what we need done first and what the curriculum states, and we forget the students. So putting them first.
Yeah, I would just underscore the relationship part of it, that you can't substitute that or skip it. You have to really develop the relationships and make them strong. For us in Allen Rock, it's birth to 3rd grade. So we've had success in saying, how can we help you be successful? You know, if you don't have children that are entering kindergarten already, you know, 9 months, 12 months behind, then you're going to be a lot more successful in making sure that they're proficient by the end of 3rd grade. So we do look at how can we help our district partners be successful with what's, you know, obviously front and center for them, which is student proficiency.
I didn't get asked the question, but I have a thought on this. I think we can't overlook the political process in this instance as well. I mean, I think so many of you in this room have been instrumental not just at the statewide level, but locally. I mean, just like we did the exercise today about getting these elected officials to commit that this is a priority to them. I know I spent almost 10 years at LA Unified. All the work, I would argue, that came, the programs, was a direct result of the advocates in that community going to their school board members, going to their district leadership, and essentially over time demanding that this needed to be part of the bigger portfolio. And I think today the programs that you have there are a direct result of that direct advocacy.
Assemblymember McCarty, there's been, there has been increases in investments in ECE. Is there ever, do you think it could go to a place where the way in which K-12 has a more reliable funding base, and obviously where that money comes from is something that can't be touched very easily, is aligning 0 to 5 with a K-12 system, could you potentially move from the place where every single year advocates are hoping and praying and organizing and pounding on doors and waiting for the budget to come out to a place where it's a little, where an investment is more long-term and guaranteed?
I think logistically, it's always going to be a struggle still, because of the billion we've been able to put in the budget last 3 years for preschool and childcare. I'm going to say roughly half of it, maybe more, was under Prop 98, because the programs are under the Department of Education, so they somewhat slide in with K-12. So I think maybe having a more aligned ask, very powerful if you had the Ed Coalition with the administrators, the teachers, the classified employees going in there with the ECE community with a single ask for kids in California. That would be powerful, but too often we're left competing. I mean, let's face it, like the healthcare debate was just frightening 2 weeks ago. If that Graham-Cassidy bill would have passed, we would have had to shut down the UC system, the CSU system, the community college system, all state preschool and childcare programs, all state parks, and our state prison systems, just to keep the people on healthcare. And so there's so many competing issues on a year-to-year basis that it is really hard. And I think back to what Edgar just said, it is really critical for people to make the connections with lawmakers and ask them not just to say, because every politician in the Capitol is going to say, like, oh yeah, I'm for preschool, I'm for childcare, I'm for that. Okay, but is it your top 3? Like when you get behind those closed doors in caucus, are you going to put your dot on that's the issue you want to fight for, go to the mat for? This year we did it for housing and transportation and a little in the budget, a little bit childcare and higher ed, but year to year, we need to make sure that we are teeing up our lawmakers to make sure that this is one of the top asks.
And one of the costs really that's associated, and Scott, you touched on this by being able to pay your teachers more. Many early childhood educators don't even have the benefits that a K-12 teacher has. There's no chance of a pension, let alone mention hopefully being paid minimum wage. How does the field maybe learn or come to what K-12 teachers have been able to win in terms of benefits and some workplace rights? Do you feel like aligning in a B-12 system that teachers will be better off, early childhood educators will be better off?
Absolutely. I see it every day in my state preschool program. I have teachers who are barely above the poverty line and who don't even have benefits for them and their family are, coming to work every day, putting in the time with our kiddos. And I think if they were paid above the poverty line, had a benefits package, I think it does make a difference. It makes a difference in morale too. And it's not only, like I say, investing in our programs, but we've got to invest in the people that are in the programs. We got to give those teachers a comprehensive benefits package, a fair salary, and the time and the training and the tools to be successful. And I think you will absolutely see a difference in our programs. And you won't see the high turnover rate that we see in our state preschool programs, because they will go and find those programs that can pay them that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One, it's unconscionable what we pay early childhood teachers. It's unethical. At Kidango, we are hell bent to pay our teachers as much as we possibly can.
Yes.
Thank you. At the same,
But there's a budget reality,
yeah,
right?
there's a budget reality, and there's only so much money that Kevin gives us.
Oh, his fault.
And you have to look at state preschool and TK when you think about this, right? There's no question. TK teachers get paid what their K-12 colleagues make. We're scratching tooth and nail to get to what, half of that when you think about pension and benefits included on average for state preschool. We're going to have to let go of our institutional interest, and we're going to have to really embrace whatever we can in terms of what's best for children and what's best for teachers. It is absolutely wrong that we live in one of the richest countries in the world, and we have mostly low-income women of color who have perhaps the most important job in our society, which is teaching our youngest children, and we pay them almost nothing. That's not a society that I don't think any of us believe in, and we've got to change it, and we need to do what it takes to do that.
I mean, and obviously California is California, but in the current political climate, Assemblymember McCarty, how do you, obviously you might be in the hot seat here to get more money, but you have to turn around to others who are nowhere near as supportive as you are of early childhood. Does a case like this, when, in those closed door meetings, is that reality heard, let alone kind of respected and prioritized?
It is, but at the end of the day, there's only so much money on the table that you push around. There's the status quo budget that takes care of caseload and student population, healthcare, criminal justice expenses, and there's a little bit more for our priorities. How the budget process works is usually we split up a third. The governor's, his priorities or her priorities in the future. That's a shout out to Delaney Easton, right? And then the Senate and the Assembly. And so we're just, begging for the scraps. And so I'm optimistic that our next governor will focus on the revenue side, because in my view, we're $20 billion short into funding the basics of healthcare, K-12 education, ECE, and higher ed. And until we have some major fiscal reform, and there's a few proposals maybe on the ballot, and we're debating around the legislature, that we'll always be, scrapping with our friends for the little that's on the table right now.
Yeah, I think Kevin, hit it on the head. It has to be about increasing the pot, because if not, as much as we talk about alignment, as much as we talk about, we're going to work together, we're going to end up in those policy discussions, and it is zero sum. And I think this is a misconception that, when there is request out there for augmentations or for a new program, that there's no, even when they say yes, it's not new money. It was that at the expense of something else. I used the analogy yesterday about the water cooler, that the water cooler is great. You come together, you talk, but what should be powerful about a water cooler is you go and tell others, right? So I think that's one of the takeaways, that I think this educating, that if we really are going to make a change to the system, that it's going to take as much power as he might have here next to us on his left. It's not really it. It's going to be all of you folks and the folks in the community about saying yes to some big systemic changes that are going to bring more revenues into the system.
Thank you. I want to go to a few of the questions that are coming from the floor, kind of going a little bit back to the initial note that we started on, just to to think about the potential downside or the worries of aligning 0 to 5 with K through 12. And one question says, the academic standards of 96-97 made the serious error of pushing everything down a grade. In building a B12 system, how can we best avoid making this error again?
For me, I think it's, we have to get out of what's traditionally worked and think outside of the box. And I really do believe we need to push some of those standards back up. I think my president, Eric Hines, was here yesterday. He was talking about standards and how it's child abuse when we're pushing what we used to push in first grade down on a kindergartner. And I agree with that. I think we need to look at changing that and allowing our preschool kiddos to play, and then, you know, setting them up for the real life skills that they're going to need in kindergarten, and changing the way we look at kindergarten so that it's not completely academic. I hate when I go into kindergarten classrooms and I see students sitting at desks already, and they're doing pen and paper, and they're expected to write, you know, 30 sentences, and they're 5. You know, some of them can't even sit still. So I think we have to think outside the box. It takes everybody in this room, our lawmakers, and not just do what's traditional, but what is really in the best interest of students. And maybe that is pushing the standards back up.
A question for you, Scott, coming from the provider perspective. Will provider voices potentially get lost? Because obviously the 0 to 5 early childhood education system is not as simple as one system that is K through 12. There are all sorts of providers who are funded in all different kinds of ways. What do you feel like the provider role is in aligning 0 to 5 with, or birth to 5 with the K through 12 system?
I mean, it's central, it's core. You know, I think what our experience has shown in the last few years is that our voice is getting stronger and stronger, and that more and more people are listening. And honestly, that more and more people in positions of authority and power are our people. So I actually see the trend as there's a lot of people are embracing what we've been talking about for a long time.
And if you have advice, if there are providers out here and they feel like, I want to get involved, I want to be engaged, but you know, they're running a childcare or they're a teacher in the system, how do they do that? What's your advice for them?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, sir.
Well, I mean, we all know there are a number of different associations that you can belong to and have a voice in. I think it depends on your level of appetite and how entrepreneurial you are. But here's something. I spent the first 5 years in early childhood advocacy. You know, for those of us who sat, you know, Child Development Policy Institute back in the day, we used to meet at the bottom of a basement, you know, no air conditioning with this fan going on, at what is now a very nice ritzy building. And we never set foot in the Capitol. We'd always come all the way to Sacramento, meet in a basement, and then go home. Well, we've come a long ways, but that would be my one piece of advice. Don't spend too much of your time out here. Get in that building and start talking with the people that make votes.
A couple of questions, interesting questions around data collection. And I'm wondering, so one question is, what types of data does the state need to support increasing state funding for early learning? What would help you in those rooms, those closed door meetings? Like if you could throw down a set of data and just say, you need to fund this, what would that be?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, First Five and I forget their partner, they had a legislative briefing on TK, transitional kindergarten, and looking at some results that an independent thought out, the AIR did a big research and laid it all out there, and it was very powerful. And I think sometimes we complicate data collection. Does it work or does it? You know, are kids more likely to succeed being in this, or are they not? And you know, the more that you can show that this is a worthy investment, the more likely a policymaker is going to vote with their 2 or 3 priorities that, you know what, of the thing that I think we should spend our scarce resources on, this is the one. And granted, I'd like to be in a position where we're not, fighting over the same scraps on the table, but expanding the pie. But in the interim, data collection that shows success is tremendously important for lawmakers.
You know, and early childhood has in some ways, I feel, much more interesting and progressive ways of gathering that data, especially because we're talking about assessing children at the end of the day, than, a simple sit at a desk and fill out bubble questions and get one grade. And, is there a way that that data collection at the ECE level, one, might either trickle up, but two, is that what you learn about children and how they're progressing at an early age, can that help if it follows them into the K-12 system so that their kindergarten and first grade teachers know what their challenges are and what their strengths are coming out of an early childhood model? Does that help in an educational continuum?
Absolutely. I think for me, like I said, I always partner with my K teachers, and I think it's important for them to know, one, not only the student that they're receiving, but what those students' strengths and weaknesses are, what their learning style is. Because if I'm that K teacher and I'm getting 30 new kiddos and I'm supposed to hit the ground running, it'd be nice if I got something from my partner that said, hey, this is what this kiddo best learns, like, this is what he's good.
Why doesn't that happen? I mean, to an outsider, it seems such a no-brainer.
Politics. I think it's a lot of posturing. And I know as a county office, we oversee district budgets, but sometimes we don't have those conversations with our district partners. And it's a lot of, well, this is our student, not your student, and it shouldn't be like that. This is everybody's student. I may serve him for a time, but he's going to eventually go into your district, and he's now your responsibility until his 12th grade. So unfortunately, we need to have more conversations like that. And I'm starting in San Bernardino County. I know I have colleagues in other county offices that are doing it, but we need to continue to have the conversations. And Scott put it perfectly. It's relationship building. It's building those bridges across those barriers, and it's putting, students first and everybody else second.
And part of that relationship is us asking kindergarten teachers, what is it that you feel is important that kids need to know when they start? And we're doing that more and more now. And honestly, like, when we got transitional kindergarten signed into law, we were asked by foundations and First Five, what should we do now? And we asked, we said, would you please evaluate and see if this thing works, right? Because, 100,000 children or 80,000 children, or however many are in it now, it's $1 billion, whatever it is a year. It's a lot of money. And the reality is we don't have an answer for that for state preschool. And the one instrument that we do have where we track developmental progress of children is ridiculous. The DRDP, 2 to 3 hours per child, 2 to 3 times a year. Sarah Neville Morgan left the room, so I can say this, and she knows. I love her, and I know we're going to work to having a kindergarten readiness definition and a deeper understanding of what are the skills that children need to be successful in school without measuring it all, which is what the 54 pages of the DRDP does now. I'm telling you, I'm tired of going into nap time in our full-day preschool rooms and seeing teachers do the DRDP in the dark. We got to move on.
Yeah.
So we are basically out of time, but I just want to do a lightning round. So you each get one comment of about 20 seconds. And what I'd love you to do is just address, I feel like when we say birth through 12, we're thinking about 3-year-olds maybe, definitely 4-year-olds, and then the K through 12. Birth. What's happening? What is the what do we need to focus on from the moment a child is born until they maybe hit a 3-year-old preschool program if they're lucky?
I think we need to give our providers, so whether that be a teacher, a licensed daycare facility, we need to give them training. We need to give them opportunities to get trained. We need to increase their funding, and we need to provide them with revenue, so that they can do their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about babies, you're talking about parents, right? They're their child's first teacher. We should do everything that we can to support them.
I've been beating the drum, looking at it from a policy end that we could come together in these forums and say, yes, we're going to work together, but then we leave this room and we end up across the street on, opposite sides, and we never talk to each other again until we're back here next year. So I think out of these gatherings, I think Kevin's actually the one who said it, that it would be great we agree to disagree that we're not going to agree on everything, but if there's those one or two issues that we can come together on, I think that would be a good step forward.
And as far as the P, I came from a preschool advocate world, and as much as it's easier to explain to a lawmaker, focus on expanding access, that the reality is B is so important because so many kids, by the time you get to P, lots of stuff's going on. So a caring adult, a caring teacher, a caring individual, those early years, especially with kids, and more conversations about toxic stress and ACEs, and it's the whole piece of the puzzle that we can't forget as well.
Great, thank you. Let's give all our panelists a big thank you. And to wrap up the conference is Carla from the Advancement Project, who is going to give you all the final words of wisdom.
Yes. And by the way, the last panelist up here left their glasses, so right here.
So as we wrap up a decade's worth of work, I can't imagine a more distinguished panel to finish us off after 10 years of bringing this work together. We've had people that created a new transitional kindergarten. We have the fabulous Deepa Fernandez that actually elevated early learning, early childhood education in our media. And we have the voice of teachers. So one more round, please. Thank you for the last panel. And I really want to thank all of you that have stood with us today. I know that coming to a two-day conference is incredibly difficult. You leave behind that pile of work. You leave behind all those meetings that you had to say no to. Our kids, our families. I personally left behind my two little ones, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. With fear in my husband's eyes. And in particular, because I'm going to admit to a guilty pleasure that my family and I have, we watch American Ninja Warrior. Have any of you watched it? Oh, yes! I was a little embarrassed of admitting it. For those of you that have not watched it, it's an obstacle course that athletes train for a year to go through. And it's the types of obstacles that people have are sort of 20-foot climbing ropes. There's this thing called a barrel rolling log where you hold on to it and you spin, and it's trying to get you off. And then there's this thing called the 14-foot warp wall, and athletes fail at it all the time. It's so bad that people are constantly yelling, "Beat the wall, beat the wall." So as I was leaving on Sunday, my son was creating a Ninja Warrior obstacle course. He put pillows everywhere. He took our exercise ball, and that was the rolling log. And our sofa, the back of the sofa, had become the 14-foot warped wall. So as I was walking out, my little 1-year-old in her little piggy tail, super cute, was trying to climb up the wall, and my son was yelling, "Beat the wall, beat the wall." And we came to this conference, and I think about the sort of obstacles that we have had to fight as ninja warriors of early learning, early childhood and education. I think about the last decade and what it's meant for our field. We are victims to economic roller coasters. The early learning field constantly has to struggle with that. About a decade ago, during the Great Recession, we lost $1 billion and have not come back. That meant about 25% of our childcare spaces and have not seen that come back. We have not recovered. We are getting slowly better. Today's conversation was about reminding us, how are we actually going to work to build the system that goes beyond what we had before the Great Recession? We talked about an early learning vision from the federal government that we all get very excited about. We talked about infants and toddlers. We talked about figuring out how we take Proposition 58 and really elevate dual language learners in the work that we do. Several other conversations, and we concluded with the Birth to 12 conversation today, and we will be building on that during our Birth to 12 water coolers. And we had a 2-day conversation with our gubernatorial candidates, and every one of them said that early childhood education is a priority. This room was full, and we all heard it, and it is videotaped. So from that, what do we do with a governor that is on our side? We really have to start figuring out together what that will look like. And our hope is that we figure that out together. And the last panel mentioned the first 100 days. We have to start thinking about those first 100 days. They were here. They told us that this is a priority, and what will those first 100 days look like? So we hope to partner with you in doing that. Lastly, I really just want to thank a few people that really made this happen. Our panelists and speakers, outstanding, taking time off. Thank you. The remarkable Camille Maven, who gives us, thank you. A person that is really committed to our kids and has shown it her entire life. The Advancement Project Ninja Warriors that pulled this together. Adam, Jasenia, Junhee, and Emma, the smoothness of this program would not have happened without these individuals. Thank you. And Vicky, Ernesto, and Khadija, you all are visionaries. It is an honor to come to work with you. And most importantly, the work you do actually creates real change in the world for our kids. So thank you. And last but not least, this would not be the end of our conference unless we had 3 really important things to ask of you before you go. Number 1, evaluations matter, and we really want to figure out how to do the Birth to 12 water cooler right. Please, please give us your thoughts, and the evaluations are right in front of you. Number 2, you will see my email posted up here. We will continue conversations with the gubernatorial candidates, and we want to know what stood out for you and what you want to do with the information that came out. If you just shoot me one email, just whatever brilliant thought comes to your mind, it really will be collected with other partners that we're working with, and we hope we get that input from you. And last but not least, for being the best students and staying till the end, there are centerpieces. Please take them with you, and hope you have a safe journey home. Thank you.